to Anyone Can Learn to Code. In a previous episode, we created this dog class, that is a dog factory that will produce instances of a dog. Now this particular dog class is only capable of producing 3-year-old Dalmatians named Fido. It's fair to say that this dog class is fairly inflexible. It would be much more useful to have a class that can create all different types of instances of dogs. How can we go about doing so? So to start, I am going to delete all of the instance methods we've already created, and we're going to start from scratch. We're going to create a new method called setName. And the goal of this method is to actually change the dog's name. The way this will work is that the setName method will accept an argument. I will call this temporary variable text for now. And we're going to create a variable called dog's name and set it to be whatever the text is that was passed in as an argument to this method. We will then create our name method, but instead of having it return Fido, it is going to return the dog's name variable, or whatever string is stored in that variable. So to use this, we would say something along these lines: dog equals capital D dog.new. So we tell the dog class to produce a new instance of dog. We take that instance and store it in this variable called dog with a lowercase d. We then say dog.setName, and we will pass in a string as an argument, and we will call it Fifi. And then we will say puts dog.name. So on line 14, we call the setName method, pass in the Fifi string as an argument. That gets received by this temporary variable called text. We take that text and then store it in another variable called dog's name. Now on line 15, we attempt to call the name method on the dog instance, and the name method returns the dog's name variable. So in theory, puts dog.name should print Fifi to the screen. However, this will not work. Let's test it out. And here we get a error message on line 8. So that would be this line of return dog's name. And the error message is undefined local variable or method dog's name for this particular dog instance. We can then see there's a second line in the stack trace that references line 15. And that's because line 15 is the line that actually calls the name method. So line 15 triggered line 7, which in turn called line 8, and line 8 is where the true error is happening. And the error message is saying undefined local variable or method dog's name, which means that Ruby does not recognize this dog's name. It does not recognize dog's name. It says this might be a variable or a method, but I don't recognize it. And that's a curious thing because on line 4, we clearly establish this variable called dog's name. Why does Ruby not recognize the dog's name variable on line 8 if we've established it on line 4? And the answer is that this is something that is established in the Ruby language, and that is that variables that are declared and created inside one instance method are forgotten by the time the method has completed running. So although indeed we have established a dog's name variable in the setName method, which we actually called on line 14, the fact is that Ruby forgets about the variable as soon as the method completes running. Therefore, when we actually call dog.name on line 15, and we run this line on line 8, which says return dog's name, Ruby says, I have no idea what this dog's name variable is. So this would seem to be a tough problem. Luckily, Ruby has a very simple way to handle this, and that is that if we, when creating our variable on line 4, use an @ as part of the variable name, this variable becomes a special variable known as an instance variable. The cool thing about instance variables is that Ruby does remember instance variables even after the method that establishes them has completed running. Therefore, on line 8, we can also put an @ here, so that on line 14, when we set the name to be Fifi, we pass in the Fifi string as a argument to the text temporary variable. We take that text, which in this case happens to be the string Fifi, and set that to be the @dogsName instance variable. Then on line 15, when we call the name method on the dog instance, we return the dog's name instance variable, which Ruby remembers because Ruby remembers instance variables across various instance methods. And that's just the way that Ruby works. Let's test this out in the terminal. We can see now that when we said put dog.name on line 15, that successfully has the string Fifi printed to the terminal. Now we can do the same thing for the other types of attributes of the dog. So we can have a setBreed method, which will also take some text, and we will say dog's breed is text, and then we can create another method called breed, return the dog's breed instance variable, and it becomes an instance variable simply because it has an @ at the beginning. And note that the @ is actually considered part of the variable name. Finally, we can have a setAge method, which will take in some sort of number. Now I just happened to call this argument number for clarity's sake, but I could have called it purple hippo. But I'll go back to calling it number. And we will say that the dog's age will be whatever number was passed in, and that the age method will return the dog's age instance variable. Finally, in our code here, we can say dog.setBreed can be poodle, and dog.setAge can be 1. It's 1 year old. And then we can say this dog is a dog.age 2s year old dog.breed named dog.name. Let's try that out. This dog is a 1-year-old poodle named Fifi. What we have just successfully done is create a class that is much more flexible. This dog class can now produce any sort of dog. It is not limited to only one type.